actually start. We have already speakers here. So, dear EUEA members and colleagues, I'm really glad to welcome all of you today as we gather to dig into the critical discussion concerning the carbon border adjustment mechanism and its application for the Ukrainian electricity sector. I am Anastasia Vrashinska, serving as the director of the European Ukrainian Energy Agency. Our association serves as a nexus for investors in the Ukrainian renewable energy and energy efficiency sectors, but also between Ukrainian authorities, financial institutions. We have a rich history and extensive experience in advocating for the interest of foreign investors in Ukraine, promoting their policies and technologies and financial best practices that foster a transition towards modern, sustainable, and economically viable energy sector in Ukraine. We have people still joining. And today we will be focusing on the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which entered into force in October 2023. This mechanism requires that importers of certain goods and services, including electricity, will be required to pay for the embedded greenhouse gas emissions while exporting these goods into the EU. As of October 2023, importers into the EU are obliged to report for the emissions, and then they will be obliged to pay for these emissions. We specifically focus on the electricity sector today, as we realize that it has huge importance to our members, who are the investors in Ukrainian renewable sector and other stakeholders on Ukrainian electricity market. Most of them are interested in using the option of exporting electricity when the time comes and the opportunity arises. So we want all of them to be prepared and know what to expect. We also understand that electricity sector is one of the sectors that is eligible for temporary exemption from CBAM. So we also understand that the requirements for this exemption lies in the reforms on the electricity sector that we and our members, and mainly all the experts on this in this sector, are advocating for. So we want to discuss the details of CBAM regulations that are relevant for electricity sector. We will explore the potential implications for renewables, including renewables, their conditions for exemption, what is the Ukrainian readiness for compliance, and what would be the ramifications of non-compliance. And also, I want us to look today at measures that Ukraine is already taking to prepare itself for full CBAM implementation. So I thank for your participation today. We have already a lot of people joined. I would just small organizational moments. I would ask everybody to be muted when you are not speaking. We will have a Q&A session after the presentations of our speakers, so please keep your questions and do not interrupt the speakers while they are doing their presentations or after. And I think that we can start with the presentation of our speakers. The first one would be Rouven Stubbe from Berlin Economics. Rouven and his team have been already digging into the details of CBAM for quite a long time. So I'm pretty sure that He will share a lot of insights valuable for our discussion today. So please, Rouven, you would be able to unmute yourself and share the presentation now. Can you do that? Is everything okay?
Can you hear me?
Great. Yes, yes, fantastic. We can hear you.
Can you see the screen as well?
Yes.
Perfect. Let me just put this full screen. That didn't work. No, wait. Now you should see it in full screen, right?
Yeah, we see, but the presentation is not in the full. Oh, now it is. All good.
Okay. Maybe there's a slight time lag. All right. So without further ado, let me start. Don't be confused if I look not at the camera directly, because I'm working with two screens and I'm looking at the larger screen. So I'll speak about both the implications of CBAM once it takes full effect, including with financial payments from 2026, the implications for electricity exports from Ukraine to the European Union. And then I will also talk about this possible exemption for Ukraine's electricity sector, temporary exemption until 2030. That is a possibility that's already kind of integrated in the CBAM regulation as it has been adopted by the European Union. So just very briefly, my name is Rouven Stubbe. I'm consultant from Berlin Economics. We have a long history of advising governments of transition countries in Eastern Europe, the Western Balkans, Caucasus, and Central Asia on economic policy reform and sustainable development. In particular, Ukraine, since over 16, 17 years. And we have a strong in-house expertise on economic, energy, and climate policy, supported by a wide network of external experts as well. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of the Low Carbon Ukraine project, which is supporting the Ukrainian government with demand-driven analysis and policy proposals to transition to a low-carbon economy since 2018. It's part of the International Climate Initiative and supported by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Protection, BMWK. And since 2022, since the Russian full-scale invasion, we have also an additional focus in the project on how a green reconstruction of Ukraine's energy sector and more broadly economy could look like, and how to create a more resilient energy system. I think, unfortunately, still a very relevant topic these days. So on CBAM has been in force since October 2023. So the EU has set up its carbon border adjustment mechanism. How does it work? It covers a range of goods and services: cement, iron and steel, aluminum, fertilizers, electricity, which we will talk about today, as well as hydrogen. And excluding electricity, actually, this is about 20% of Ukraine's pre-war exports to the EU that would fall under CBAM. Now it's even more. And from 2026, importers will have to start purchasing CBAM allowances, so certificates, the price of which will be determined by an increasing proportion of EU ETS, so EU emissions trading system allowance prices, which will gradually approach the full price of EU ETS allowances by 2034. So there is a gradual phase-in of these payment obligations from 2026 until 2034, and the kind of the schedule of how this will be phased in you can see on this graph below. So what are kind of the implications if Ukraine does not comply with these exemption conditions that we will discuss later? So then importers, so actually importers on the EU side, European importers of CBAM covered goods, including electricity, would have to purchase these certificates and thereby pay kind of for the embedded emissions of these goods and services. So the importer pays, not the exporter. That's always also sometimes a confusion. But of course, this makes the exporters, so for example, electricity exporters, less competitive, because they're importers. They will have to take into account that they have to pay for CBAM certificates when purchasing Ukrainian electricity, for example. So broadly speaking, there are two options or ways how the embedded emissions for electricity would be determined when accounting for CBAM. The first is the default value, and this is very important to understand exactly how this works. So the electricity exports from Ukraine covered by CBAM with the default value would be priced based on the weighted average emission intensity of fossil-based, so coal and gas-fired electricity generation inside Ukraine, not the average emissions intensity of the grid, which is relatively low in Ukraine with a high share of nuclear, some renewables and hydro as well, but the fossil-based electricity generation mix intensity. Why is that the case? The justification from the European Commission why basically the average fossil-based electricity emissions intensity was chosen is that fossil sources are most of the time the price-setting sources on the electricity market. So basically, for every additional megawatt hour of electricity that Ukraine would export to the EU, even if 90%, let's say, in a certain hour are based on nuclear and renewables, every additional megawatt would be provided by the price-setting source. So coal or gas plants would have to increase production to increase exports, all else being equal. So this rule is quite unfortunate for Ukraine, because this would mean a high default value for CBAM emissions intensity. And as I just explained, this would be regardless of the actual emissions intensity, even if a renewables or nuclear producer would export electricity. In case of the default value, they would have to, or their counterpart, the EU importer, would have to pay the CBAM charge for this default emissions intensity. So this would make electricity from Ukraine definitely less competitive due to the high prices for the embedded emissions of this default fossil-based electricity emissions mix. Then there's the second option. This is the specific emission intensity. There, of course, the emissions factor would be 0 for renewables and nuclear. But the caveat is that many conditions apply to be available for the specific emission intensity. So the CBAM regulation is very clear that in order to qualify for the specific emissions intensity, there needs to be a direct power purchase agreement, PPA, in place between the producer and the European importer of the electricity. There would have to be a proof that there was no physical congestion at any time of export. So physical congestion of the interconnector, the electricity network connection between Ukraine and the European Union. And there would be the need for a nomination for allocated cross-border capacity for the interconnector for the entire volume of the exported electricity at the time of export. And all these conditions would have to be verified by an accredited verifier. So a relatively high hurdle to take in order to qualify for the specific emission intensity, so that exporters with 0 embedded emissions, renewables or nuclear, can actually profit from the fact that this is 0 emissions and not pay CBAM charges. So this is very important to understand. The second implication, more on a broader scope, is the implications for market coupling between the Ukrainian electricity system and the European Union's electricity markets. So electricity is, of course, a peculiar good. It's very different from steel or cement, where it's very easy at the border, the customs authority to check how many tons are traded, who is trading with whom. Electricity is mostly traded on dedicated markets that are organized through anonymous auctions, power exchanges. And with electricity market coupling, which Ukraine intends to do with the European partners, there would be an anonymous market that would be cross-border, so a cross-border anonymous market. So in this cross-border anonymous market, it would be, of course, very difficult or even impossible to track exporters and importers and to assign who actually has to pay CBAM. So if you trade on an anonymous market, you don't know exactly who is selling to who and which emission intensity is embedded. that's exactly the reason why the European Commission has actually designed this default value, and then the option that specific emission intensity requires a direct PPA, because with the direct PPA, of course, you know who is trading with whom. So in case of the introduction of CBAM, of course, this might be potentially incompatible with electricity market coupling, because you want to assign payment obligations to importers, but if you don't know who is trading with whom on a coupled electricity market, that's actually not possible. So because there is this potential incompatibility between CBAM and electricity market coupling, the European Commission has provided the option for an exemption of electricity from CBAM. And that's what we're talking about in today's event mostly. So the electricity market coupling, and this is important to understand, could be halted, stopped until price parity between the EU ETS is achieved. So until Ukraine has a carbon price that is equivalent to the EU's, because then there's no longer any need for CBAM, and then you can proceed with market coupling, unless this exemption for electricity trade is obtained. So if Ukraine wants to proceed with electricity market coupling before reaching the same carbon price as the EU emissions trading system, then Ukraine should aim to obtain this exemption, temporary exemption of electricity from CBAM. And there's even a risk, if this is not obtained, that electricity market coupling, if it happens, for example, at the end of this year or next year, that it would have to be rolled back if the exemption conditions are not fulfilled in order to then actually apply CBAM. So failure to comply with the CBAM exemption could actually delay Ukraine's EU accession process in this area, in the area of electricity market integration. And we do believe that it's very important to actually obtain the exemption for electricity from CBAM. So what are actually the criteria to obtain this exemption? I'm going to go over these 6 points relatively briefly, and then I think the following speakers will discuss in more detail what the status of some of these policies is and where Ukraine is heading at the moment. So broadly speaking, there are these 6 conditions. The first one is already fulfilled. It stipulates that there needs to be an agreement to apply union law, European Union law for energy. Ukraine is a contracting party to the energy community, and thereby has such an agreement and is intending to apply European Union law for energy. So this is fulfilled. But then actually the second condition is that the domestic legislation has to be also de facto in line with European Union acquis. And there, this is not fully fulfilled yet, but actually I should change this to partially or partly fulfilled, because of course there has been a lot of progress in aligning Ukraine's legislation with EU acquis, but there are still a few gaps on some mostly secondary legislation, on market coupling, on some of the details of the renewables acquis, but mostly I think Ukraine is on a good track there. Then there's a need for the implementation of a roadmap, how Ukraine intends to fulfill these exemption criteria. So this is kind of more an umbrella condition, a roadmap to say how Ukraine intends to fulfill the other criteria. This is kind of partly fulfilled. There's a roadmap under development for the implementation of an ETS. But probably there needs to be a broader roadmap that also kind of outlines how Ukraine intends to fulfill the other points of the exemption conditions. So then the fourth one is a commitment to climate neutrality by 2050, in line with the European Green Deal. Currently, the current NDC and draft NECP, as far as I understand at least, are not in line with the 2050 net zero target across all sectors. There are net zero targets for the energy sector, but not for all greenhouse gas emitting sectors. And then the second last and probably most challenging condition is the implementation of an emissions trading system for electricity. And here, the kind of requirement is to converge to EU ETS prices by 2030. So Ukraine doesn't have to introduce EU ETS prices, equivalent prices to European Union emissions trading system right away, but there needs to be some sort of roadmap and plan how to achieve convergence of carbon prices with EU ETS by 2030. So that is relatively soon, of course, and that is by far the most challenging condition, I think, and something we should discuss, and we will probably discuss after. And then the last point is the implementation of an efficient system to prevent indirect import of electricity. So this is currently not in place, of course, and here there should be probably some thinking of whether Ukraine actually wants to implement its own CBAM, more or less copying the EU CBAM and implementing something similar. So, for example, to prevent indirect imports of electricity from Moldova through Ukraine to the EU, or maybe even thinking of implementing a joint ETS with Moldova so that Moldova also fulfills these exemption conditions together with Ukraine, because I think Moldova is the only country that Ukraine is still trading electricity with at the moment that is not in the EU. So these are the conditions. I hope this gives a good overview, and I'm sure we will discuss, let me check the time, but I think I talked more or less 20 minutes. We will discuss more in detail maybe later of how Ukraine is on track or not to fulfill some of these, or hopefully all of these conditions. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion later. Maybe just a few words on the timeline. So there are some reporting obligations intends to fulfill these conditions, and then this will be assessed by the European Commission, and by the end of 2027, there's a second kind of progress report that would be required. And I think I already concluded before, so I won't present this part today. So thanks a lot for your attention, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Rouven. I think that yeah, that is a really good start for our discussion today. I will pass the floor to representatives from the reform support team from Ukrainian Ministry of Energy, to Olha Yevstihnieieva and Svitlana Andrushchenko. So please, colleagues, present your stance on the readiness of Ukraine for CBAM implementation, and what would be the position of Ukrainian government in the exemption process, and what are the steps that are being made right now.
Thank you very much, Anastasia, for invitation of the ministry, just to provide in updates where the ministry and in the pathway to CBAM. You know that currently the ministry is also working on the EU accession negotiation position, and CBAM is part of it. And thank you, Rouven, for presenting all those opportunities and probably those requirements, 6 requirements for just electricity sector to be ready to implement for applying for some certain kind of exemption, and a couple of introductory words where we are, what are the actions initiated currently in these pathways, and maybe some just more details on policy paper that Ministry requested to develop. And thank you, Rouven, for cooperation, and Pavlo Masiukov also in cooperation in these pathways. Obviously, just let me update that just electricity sector as defined within the regulations on CBAM is the only one which can obtain temporary exemption from CBAM till 2030. And these conditions currently is going to be discussed more in probably details. and also a certain framework for this condition to be fulfilled depends in major cases from the Ministry of Energy, but at the same time there is the coordination of activities between the or among the multiple governmental and joint activities of government is absolutely required in this stream. We currently cooperate and working on the development of a roadmap toward the CBAM implementation with the Ministry of the Environment, with the Ministry of Economy, and also cooperates in certain issues which appear to be very important for our business and companies while providing the reporting since October 2023. And the first probably activity that was initiated together with the Ministry of Economy at the level of a project together with the Office of Economic Transition at the Ministry of Economy. We are working on the methodological calculations on determining the emission grid factor, which is currently, I think that we're extremely important. This initiative involves developing an approach and regulated calculations on green gas emissions related to the production and consumption of electricity from the national grid. And obviously this is important with the framework of CBAM as well. This is important for determining compliance with green hydrogen criteria in terms of emission intensity of the energy system within the bidding zone where the hydrogen production facility is located, potentially assessing the potential and actual reductions in greenhouse gas emissions due to various projects and Paris Agreement mechanism, voluntary emission reduction markets. And obviously that these calculations will be useful both for business, for reporting purposes, and for energy sector as well. And also currently we just in detail working on the roadmap, as I've mentioned, on the implementation of those criteria for the possibility of exemption to be fulfilled. And we know that time is rather pressing, and the situation also is much present. That is why my apologies not the deputy minister to be presented as a speaker here, because this night that was the next very pressing night for energy system of Ukraine. And we know that time pressing also about the country applying for temporary exemption, which must be submitted just two progress. I speak about two progress reports till the first one is till July 2025, and the second one by December 31st, 2027. And that is why we currently intensively working over all those conditions. And just updating where we are with these exemption conditions. The ministry, as the probably the most who is working on the political and legislative regulatory framework on that. And currently we're working on the clean energy package, which is one of the requirements as the fourth energy package, and the Ministry of Energy developed the draft law on the RES directive implementation, the 1, 2, and the third one, with all the specifics on this issue. And this is the huge package, and we do this in cooperation with the EURC and other central executive authorities as well, in the just close cooperation with that. We also speaking about the our approachment and adaptation of this legislation and directives and regulations within the clean energy package. And that energy strategy of Ukraine also provides the climate neutrality till 2050, but this is the only sector just currently providing this 100% adopted in legislation. At the same time, we in a close cooperation working within the national energy and climate plan, which is just focusing on the same target of climate neutrality till 2050. And in close cooperation with the Ministry of Environment, working on the ETS system for electricity electricity, and probably the most details of all those scenarios that the ministry currently working over will be provided by Olga Yevstihnieieva in details, which is provided within our policy paper as the initial step for the ministry to develop the further steps within the roadmap, moving closer to the exemption of the electricity sector and postponing the complete implementation of CBAM for electricity sector for Ukraine. Olga, the screen is yours.
Yes, thank you, Svitlana, for such a broad introduction. Thank you, Rouven, for your policy paper and your work under the CBAM in Ukraine. So actually, I am very glad that this type of discussion we have today, because regardless of our military situation, I think that we must always be prepared for the potential basic generation restoration, and this option of export always need to be green on our mind in the night hours, in the hours of a solar generation. But in any case, this money, this currency revenue is very important for us and for overall liquidity of the energy market. And as Svitlana mentioned, we have prepared an analytical policy document concerning the CBAM on energy sector and possibilities of obtaining the temporary derogation for the electricity sector. And Rouven described these conditionalities, and now I will stop maybe in more details on what is going on, just to find out what the Ministry of Energy is doing right now just to obtain this possibility to take this derogation. So the first conditionality is to have a concluded agreement with the European Union that provides for an obligation to comply with the European Union legal provisions in the electricity sector. And here we have a comply status, because as far as you know, Ukraine is a counterpart of the energy community, and that means literally that the regulatory framework on energy, environment, and competition policy and renewable energy as well is comparable in Ukraine and the European Union. So here we have like a comply status, and after this discussion we can disseminate this white policy paper where you can just to be familiarized with all of these conditions and where we are today under them. The second condition is the implementation of the main provisions of the European Union electricity law, so that is including the development of renewable energy and interconnection of the electricity markets. So that is about the market coupling. Here we have a partially comply status, but at the same time the high prospects for the fulfillment and full implementation, because the Ministry of Energy of Ukraine has established a working group to prepare a draft legislative acts for the implementation of the electricity integration package in the electricity sector, the composition of which was approved by the order of the Ministry of Energy. So this work is undergoing just to in order to unify the electricity markets. Ukrainian stakeholders are working on full implementation on about like 9 or 10 directives as well. And if we are talking about the renewable energy legislative framework, the main law is RED III directive. So that is like a key law which we need to implement. But at the same time, the scope of this directive is much broader than the electricity sector and in the stakeholder dimensions as the Ministry of Energy, because that is about the heat sector, about the transport sector, and it concerns to the Ministry of Infrastructure and so on and so forth. So we need just to find out the scope of this legislative in the electricity sector sector which we need to implement and to fulfill this condition under the CBAM regulation. And last week, we prepared an informational request to energy community, to DG Taxud, to DG Energy, to European Commission, just to find out and to have some more clearance on what scope of this RED III directive we need, like the Ministry of Energy, to implement. And also about some other question, for example, as Rouven mentioned about the equivalence of the carbon price. So what does it mean? The identical carbon price or maybe equivalence under some economics, finance conditions, statistics, and so on and so forth. So we need to find out these questions just to move forward this expert discussion and to have like more clearance on our next steps. And of course, as you all know, that last year the law was adopted on amendments to certain laws of Ukraine on restoration and green transformation of the energy system of Ukraine. And some very new novels about the net billing, about the PPAs, about the certificates of origin were established in Ukrainian legislation. So this legislation related to the electricity sector is quite okay. And now we are preparing the secondary legislation just to make this fully enact. And also, yes, as I said, the Ministry of Energy has already begun a work on drafting a law for a full implementation, the RED III directive. That is very comprehensive work, but we have high potential of fulfillment this till the end of 2025. So the next condition is about the an action plan containing a schedule for taking measures to implement the conditions set up in paragraphs D and E. And that is about the low carbon development strategy, which need to be submitted to the UNFCCC, and about the implementation this commitments into the domestic law about the climate neutrality. So as Svitlana mentioned, in electricity sector, this climate neutrality already committed in the energy strategy till 2050. But as far as I know, currently the Ministry of Environmental Protection has prepared a draft order to the Cabinet of Ministries of Ukraine on approval of the action plan for the implementation of the updated nationally determined contribution of Ukraine to the Paris Agreement for the period till 2030. And we hope that this climate commitment, which was established till 2060, will be somehow modified, and we have actually a good potential to fulfill this commitment too. And about the low carbon strategy as well. As far as we know today, the Ministry of Environmental Protection and with the external experts, with the Institute of Economic and Forecasting, who are today with us online. So they are working under some modeling, economic modeling for the strategy. That is why we evaluate that it could be possible to fulfill this commitment as well. Here we are talking about the most tough part of the conditionalities, about the equivalent carbon taxation, and it sounds like alignment its domestic legislation with the European Union on the basis of the roadmap, in particular with regard to the setting the carbon price at a level equivalent to that in the European Union, in particular with regard to electricity generation and introduction the ETS for the electricity market with the price equivalent to that in the European Union. And I am very glad that today we have Pavlo Masiukov, who will reveal us more in detail about the draft order of the ministry about the preparation operation the ETS in Ukraine. And actually, we have a very good operationalized working group under the reform support teams in the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Environmental Protection, Ministry of Energy, just to prepare some kind of a roadmap of Ukrainian newborn ETS in a pilot phase or experimental phase. So I hope that Pavlo will tell us more about this. What I can slightly mention here that maybe under some conditionalities, Ukrainian electricity sector could pretend for the free allowances in Ukrainian ETS, but some more details we can reveal only later. And the last one, that's about the preventing indirect imports of the electricity sector in the European Union, as Rouven mentioned. So we had only Moldova from where this import could be potentially done. So we can make ETS with Moldova, we can establish our mirror CBAM, or Moldova can fulfill all of these conditions as a European Union member as well. And this trouble would be solved for us and for Moldova. What I need to mention here, just I am stopping here, that we from the Reform Support Office under the Ministry of Energy prepared an informational request to DG Taxud and Energy Community to seeking these clarifications on key aspects. So the first one, that is about the equivalence conditions of the carbon price. The second one is about the scope of RED III directive legislation, which we need to implement. And the third one about the decarbonization map, which we need to prepare under the CBAM regulation as well. And for now, with the 19% of confidentiality, we can say that that is a decarbonization map which need to be developed under the energy community. And all of the details on this, I think that we can provide later after receiving the feedback from them. So I think that I can stop here and pass the floor to Pavlo Masiukov and to find out more about our ETS. So thanks.
Thank you, colleagues. We indeed can go to Pavlo Masiukov's speech. He is representing the GIZ project that is working on developing the Ukrainian ETS system. So please, Pavlo, the floor is yours.
Hello, colleagues. Pleased to be here, and indeed it's quite a pleasure to have such a conversation on this topic. And yeah, thank you very much for the previous speakers on raising quite a lot of topics already and illustrating the basically the requirements and the coming work or ongoing work which is going in that direction. Actually, yes, my name is Pavlo Masiukov, and I'm the commission manager for the project implemented by GIZ, which helps the government of Ukraine and specifically the Ministry of Environmental Protection to establish or implement ETS in Ukraine. In a second, I will share my screen.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, excellent. And now that's a full screen that you see, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, excellent. So as I have that is implementing the project on behalf of the German government and specifically the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Change under the International Climate Initiative. Today, actually, I would like to focus specifically on the issue why we discuss ETS on the topic of CBAM anyway. That's key to understand what interrelations are established between the CBAM or carbon border adjustment mechanism and the ETS as an instrument. And basically the interrelations, they are related to the multiple aspects, but today during the presentation, I still would like to focus on those aspects which regulate the aspects of exemptions. So there are much more interrelations between ETS and the CBAM, but today in the presentation, I will focus specifically on those which go into the interrelation of the aspect of the exemption from the CBAM. Basically, the CBAM regulation provides for two types of exemption. That's a general exemption, which covers the whole economy, and here for the whole economy exemption, there is basically a need that the country or territory has its own ETS, which is linked to European Union ETS, or even European Union ETS applies directly to such a country or territory. Which benefits does it bring? Basically, the first benefit that it brings that the whole country, not only the electricity sector, but the whole country and the whole economy is exempted from this CBAM. Second item which I would like to highlight here is specifically the requirement, or specifically a need that the national or regional or territorial ETS is linked with European Union ETS. So there is a specific process which is called linking, and typically a linking is formalized by a specific linking agreement. There is only one linking agreement in place with European Union ETS, and that is the linking which is established with ETS of Switzerland. In other words, for linking of the both of the system, there needs to be an agreement signed. And also we need to keep in mind that CBAM regulation has its Annex 3, where such an exemption for the whole economy based on this general exemption needs to be introduced. So the name of Ukraine needs to be introduced into the Annex 3 to be considered that both of the systems are linked, and that provides an exemption for the whole economy. In addition to that, CBAM regulation provides specifically for the electricity sector exemption. Today we have already heard specifically the requirements which needs to be fulfilled in order for the electricity sector to be temporarily exempted from the CBAM, and that's a temporal exemption stretches until 2030. Among those, there is a decarbonization roadmap. Also, the ETS, at least for electricity sector, is introduced with a EU equivalent price by 2030. As absolutely correctly Rouven mentioned, that it does not need to impose the same level of price from the very beginning, but by 2030, there is an expectation that the price in the national or territorial ETS reaches the level of European Union price, or reaches equivalence. And meeting other conditions, which definitely is an LTS 2050 climate neutrality, but I would not stop on those, but rather focus on the ETS specific items. As Olga already mentioned in her previous speech, it needs to be clarified, but nevertheless, there is already a decarbonization roadmap for the energy community in place, which has been approved by all the contracting parties of energy community back in 2021. Indeed, the roadmap needs to be updated, but nevertheless, there needs to be a clarification whether the decarbonization roadmap, which is approved by the contracting parties under the energy community, can be sufficient to basically to match one of the requirements for the electricity sector exemption from CBAM. Now Ukraine is drafting ETS specific strategy, which further details the necessary steps and the measures which needs to be taken into account when developing the national ETS. And the strategy, it's not yet publicly available, and the Ministry of Environmental Protection is at the final stage of its finalization, and I hope it soon will be available for the public review and public consultations. But nevertheless, the strategy itself is designed in a way that there is an aspiration that by 2030, the national ETS would be quite close to European Union ETS, if not equivalent. For sure, for the CBAM exemption for electricity sectors, other exemption conditions need to be tracked and fulfilled. We also need to understand that the Commission needs to check the compliance with all the conditions. It's rather not that the country itself makes an assessment and declares that the conditions are fulfilled. It's a requirement that the Commission assesses compliance, and then also the country needs to be introduced into the Annex 3 of the CBAM regulation to basically to have the electricity sector exempted from the CBAM regulation. Last but not the least on this slide, that we need to remember that the CBAM exemptions, either general or specific, may be withdrawn at any point of time in case the country does not perform or fulfill its commitments, both in the roadmaps or in case we're talking about the general exemption that the commitments are not fulfilled, then the exemption from the CBAM, either for the whole economy or for the electricity sector, can be withdrawn at any point of time. Okay. All right. Here in the slide, I put specifically the indication, what are the expectations about the national ETS and what are the timelines. Well, the expectation of the national ETS, it's basically guided by the several aspects. One of them is the aspiration of Ukraine to become EU member state, which gives a strong signal that the national ETS needs to be as closely aligned with European Union ETS, but also with the requirements for the CBAM exemptions. And here in the CBAM regulation, we see that for the economy-wide exemption, it is stated that the national ETS is compatible for linking with European Union ETS, or EU ETS is directly applicable to the country or territory. However, there are no deadlines indicated for granting such an exemption. This sector-specific or electricity-specific exemption has two slightly different formulations. So basically, point 56 of the CBAM regulation preamble state that for the CBAM exemption, one of the conditions is that the national ETS is equivalent to European Union ETS by 2030. So it does not mention the price, it mentions an equivalence. At the same time, the Article 2 of the CBAM regulation specifically indicates that the ETS, at least for electricity, needs to be established with a price equivalent to European Union ETS by 2030. So basically, these two formulations, so these two items also gives an orientation that the expectation and the assumption for the design of the national ETS is such that it should be as closely aligned with European Union design as possible, both to the fact that the ETS itself does not fix the price. ETS is an instrument, the market-based instrument, and the market actually does a discovery of the price. But at the same time, the design and the elements of the ETS and its alignment with European Union ETS definitely contribute to the alignment of the price. So in other words, the general approach and the expectation of the design for the national ETS is its as close alignment with European Union ETS as possible. The timeline. We have been actually quite quite closely working with the Ministry of Environmental Protection in developing this strategy, which is now at the final stage of its preparation, and I hope soon will be ready. And the recommendations which we have developed and transferred to the Ministry of Environmental Protection, that the beginning of ETS should start from the pilot phase. And here we see that the earliest possible date when the pilot phase can begin is 2026. It's still quite an ambitious date, since a lot of legislative work needs to be put in place, including development of the ETS law, number of secondary legislation, number of forms and templates, producing institutional arrangements. And having that in mind, 2026 seems to be quite an ambitious, but still, from our point of view, realistic date. And the recommendation would be that the pilot phase would cover similar period as it was in European Union ETS for the pilot phase. So it basically would cover the 3 calendar years, starting from 2026 and ending in 2028. And the ETS smoothly transit into the stable phase with a 5-year duration, basically starting with 2029 and finishing in 2033. The assumption is that the stable phase would be already quite closely, if not equivalently, aligned with European Union ETS, which by its design already signals that the price, the carbon price inside the Ukrainian ETS would be going into the direction of the equivalence with European Union price. Okay, so basically the plans of, as I already explained, the plans of the Ministry of Environmental Protection is to develop or draft a strategy and its operational plan, how the ETS needs to be implemented in Ukraine. I already mentioned that the strategy is a subject for the approval of the Cabinet of Ministers, so definitely it will go through the process of public and interministerial consultations. So all the stakeholders will have a possibility to have a say on that and to review the strategy. It is expected that the strategy and the operational plan will set the vision and approach, timeline and phases, strategic goals and the necessary measures which needs to be implemented, organizational and institutional arrangements, and financial resources requirements. It is clear that the strategy and the road and the operational plan to the strategy will not provide answers to all the questions. But nevertheless, they highlight the most important and the critical items and indicate the timeline when the answers to those questions need to be answered. In its current stage, the strategy anticipates that the ETS starts with its pilot phase, and the pilot phase will have some flexibilities. The flexibilities are specifically included into the pilot phase in order to have a smooth introduction of ETS in Ukraine, and also due to the fact that currently there is an MRV data scarcity coming from the MRV system due to the war-related situation and also due to the instability, I would say, with installations which are currently available in Ukraine, and knowing the fact that one of the huge power station has been just destroyed this morning or this night also indicates that some flexibilities need to be integrated in order to fill the gap with the data which is currently not available. And the stable phase actually is planned to be designed in a way that is so closely aligned with EU ETS, but by its design that the level of the price reaches equivalent with European Union ETS. We also need to mention that there is also an ambiguity about the wording equivalence in price. And that's an open question which needs additional clarification. And here, indeed, it would be quite necessary to understand whether price equivalence takes into consideration also the economic situation available in Ukraine, or whether there is a different interpretation to this term, which is included in the formulation of the CBAM regulation. Okay, and now I'm slowly moving to the next slide. Basically, that's a derogation rules for electricity sector in EU ETS. So basically, it's quite well known that the EU ETS currently the electricity sector gets all the allowances not free of charge, but rather purchase them on the auctions or get them on the secondary market. However, to accommodate the needs of some member states of European Union, the ETS in European Union actually allows the derogation rules, which actually allows free allocation of allowances to electricity sector against specific commitments and specific investments in modernization of energy sector. That is the clause which is stipulated in the current version of the directive, specifically Article 10C. And actually the reasoning why such derogation rules have been introduced into the directive were basically twofold, or we can group them into items. The first item would be to prevent sharp increases for electricity prices in the households. And the second one would be to cope more easily with the cost of making the transition to less carbon-intensive electricity generation. So these two items were the major reason why these two elements were introduced into the why this derogation rule was introduced in the design of EU ETS. I need to mention that the free allocation to electricity are provided only against modernization investments and also in compliance with the state aid rules. To take a deeper look in the history, we see that during the previous phase of ETS, basically phase number 3, 8 member states have used this derogation rule to provide free allowances to the electricity generators inside their country. In the current phase, which is phase number 4, only 3 member states in the European Union use this derogation rule to provide free allocation of allowances to electricity generators. Specifically, that's Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania, which are still using this derogation rule for their electricity sectors. Whether all countries in the European Union can use such a derogation rule, no. There is a specific requirement which indicates which specific member state may use such a derogation. So far, it's based on the GDP of such a country as compared with an average GDP of European Union. In past, this criteria also included the conditions whether the single fossil fuel was dominating in the electricity sector production, and also the items of interconnection with the UCTE networks. And I'm just finishing my speech with an indication that GIZ, our project, now helps to analyze whether electricity sector in Ukraine could fall in under the requirement for the derogation rules which are available in European Union ETS. Basically, in case Ukraine would be already a country of European Union, a member state of European Union, whether it would have the possibilities to apply for such a derogation rule for electricity sector generation. With this, I would like to finish my brief introduction into the current update on the ETS developments, and continue to stay here and open for additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavlo. I already see that our chat has become very active, and people have started already the discussion there. And now we actually have finished with the presentation 5 minutes earlier, so we will have more time for the Q&A session. So I welcome our participants to ask questions. Please raise your hand, and we will proceed with your questions. As I see in our chat, there are already some questions, so we can start with the questions from the chat and then transition to the questions from the audience. So there is... Firstly, I see that there is a question to Pavlo's presentation regarding the pilot phase, regarding the timeline of the pilot phase. Wasn't it planned for 2025?
Indeed, the ministry will take the final decision. From our point of view, the development of the law and the set of the secondary legislation seems to be unrealistic by 2025, seeing that today we already have April 2024. I believe there was a bit of confusion, meaning that the pilot and the simulation for ETS, which can start in 2025, was available. So from my point of view, in 2025, some practical tools for the simulation of the ETS for the ETS stakeholders seems quite realistic. With the beginning of pilot phase already in 2025, let the ministry take the final decision, but from the scope of work which requires developing a primary and secondary legislation and developing a number of other forms, that seems quite challenging.
Okay. Thank you, Pavlo. And I also see the comment from Torsten Wollert in our chat regarding the stance of the European Commission on that it's not pursuing any efforts to link the EU ETS with possible emission trading systems in neighboring countries. Torsten, are you with us right now? Could you please maybe elaborate on that? And maybe you could share the stance of the European Commission on like the whole exemption of Ukrainian energy sector from CBAM and the development of ETS.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting and for having this very timely discussion. Unfortunately, I'm not, let's say, well prepared because I just came back from holidays and I was not supposed to speak. It was just a comment that I talked when I was in Brussels last week, that I talked with colleagues in DG Klima. And they told me that there are no efforts now to have this kind of linking, that actually linking they see very much on the European continent for the time being limited to Switzerland. But I have not, let's say, a full overview currently, but I remember there was a dedicated meeting foreseen next month, I think in May, a workshop exactly on CBAM where colleagues from Brussels will participate. So that was just more, let's say, kind of preliminary information that the linking route that was described by Pavlo seems to be rather complicated.
Thank you. Thank you, Torsten. And I see the hand from Mykola Shlappak.
Yes. Thank you very much. So my name is Mykola Shlappak, and I have a question for Rouven. You stress in the presentation that the emission factor that should be used in the calculation is the fossil fuel based generation emission factor, or like the marginal emission factor, which determines the price on the electricity market. And but if you the regulation 1773 in several places mentions or references the International Energy Agency data set on emission factor, and this data set does not include the marginal emission factors of fossil fuel-based only generation emission factor, but instead includes only average emission factors for Ukrainian grid. So could you please clarify this, because based on some communication I've seen, it also looks that in the CBAM registry, the emission factor from International Energy Agency database is used, which is the average emission factor. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. So in the CBAM regulation, in fact, there are two options that are provided that can be used, but the Commission decides which one, in fact, it then applies in practice. But the options are provided that either the average grid intensity would be used, or the emissions intensity of price-setting power sources. And then there has been a communication from DJ Taksud in I think late December or early January, where they specified that in the basically the transition phase until 2026, so when reporting is already required, but financial payments are not required yet before 2026, the Commission applies the average intensity of fossil-based sources. So if the Commission does not change their interpretation of the regulation and uses that option or continues using that option, then it would be the intensity of fossil-based generation based on that communication from December or January. But both options are provided in the regulation, so the Commission can, of course, change the interpretation or how it intends to apply this article. But I don't know in practice in the CBAM registry what emission intensities are there, because I'm not a trader. I don't have access to the registry. But if you have any information that actually in the CBAM registry the average grid intensity is currently used or applied, then I would be very interested in getting in touch and discussing that further, because that would contradict the communication from DJ Taksud from December or January. So everything I know comes from that communication, that public guidance or communication. But happy to discuss this further and follow up afterwards to clarify that. I would be also very, very interested. So I don't have any more information than what was the public communication by the Director General.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mykola. Thank you, Rouven. We have another question from Yaroslav Petrov.
Hello, everyone. I have a question related to exemption of CBAM for electricity. So my understanding is that one of the prerequisites for exemption is implementation of a Ukrainian ETS system. And as far as I understand, for the timeline for implementation of the ETS in Ukraine, it will not become effective before 2030. And in this respect, technically, kind of, unless Ukraine gets an exemption for implementation of CBAM in general, I understand that exporters of electricity will be liable to pay CBAM. Is my understanding correct of the current status quo? Thank you.
Colleagues who could comment on that, maybe Rouven or colleagues from the ministry?
I mean, I can give a first reaction, and then maybe the colleagues from RST can add something. So unless, so you mentioned the general exemption. I don't know if you refer to the general exemption through the linking that Pavlo mentioned, or you meant basically both exemption conditions, including the one that's specific to electricity. But yeah, in any case, if neither of those two conditions is actually obtained, I think the first one is relatively theoretical. because as Torsten has explained, the EU does not intend to link with any additional neighboring countries. But the more practically available exemption condition, which is the temporary one for electricity, that is of course available. If that is not obtained, then indeed electricity exporters will have to start paying CBAM indirectly. Let me at least again underline that the EU importers are paying, but of course they can pass on the burden, and this will affect the competitiveness of electricity exporters. So from the beginning of 2026, the CBAM payments would be due by the EU importer, and then gradually be phased in. So the value is relatively low in 2026, only a couple of percentage points of the EU ETS price, but then gradually and at the end of this decade, relatively quickly, then it would go up and converge to full EU ETS prices by 2034. I don't know if that clarifies your question. I'm not sure if maybe colleagues want to add something.
Yeah, thank you. It would be interesting to hear more clarification on the application from the ministry on the exemption for electricity. It would be interesting to hear.
Yes. So actually, can you then repeat your question? Because actually, my colleagues and I specifically, we described like 3 main scenarios on the CBAM regulation. So the first one, if the third country, and Ukraine as the third country, will present an introduced ETS, which is linked to the EU ETS till 2026, then overall economy will have this exemption. The second option, if for the temporary exemption, if we will have this ETS linked to the European ETS or carbon price. So that is like for me very linked questions till 2030. And the third option, if the third country has introduced an ETS or carbon tax or carbon price that is not linked to the EU ETS at all, then we will have no exemptions at all. So we are not very flexible here. That is why the Ministry of Energy and like the Reform Support Office of Ministry of Energy, we are like getting and collecting for this third option to have the possibility to obtain this temporary derogation for the electricity sector, because that is really important. No matter if we will have export, we need to have a market conflict, and we need to have the possibility to obtain this export. That is why the equivalent carbon tax or carbon price or ETS in 2030 is very like vital for us. So that is our main meaning on this. So I'm not sure if I give an answer to your question. So
yeah, thank you. Partially. So basically, I understand that by 2026, CBAM should work for us. And there is no chance that by 2026, the Ukrainian ETS will start working in Ukraine. So based on this, I understand that the only solution for Ukrainian exporters is work with the ministry in order to get exemption from the CBAM with respect to electricity, because otherwise we will need to pay for exports.
Actually, I think that is totally a question to Mr. Pavlo Masiukov, because he presented to us that the pilot phase of ETS can be presented from 2026. And in that case, if the European Union will recognize this as a fulfillment of this condition, then overall economy will have this like not an exemption, but like collecting the carbon price internally in Ukraine to the state budget for the competitive redistribution for the decarbonization issues. But I will transfer this to Pavlo, because that is ETS, that is not a part of the Ministry of Energy. That is in governmental cooperation, mostly with the GIZ and Ministry of the Environmental Protection.
Exactly, yeah. I would like probably to complement and try to answer the question. So in fact, the plan or the strategy, which is still in the draft version, anticipate that the ETS in Ukraine starts already in 2026. So there is no need to wait until 2030. There is an expectation that the price equivalence from Ukrainian ETS will be reached to European Union ETS price equivalence by 2030, meaning that the pilot phase will continue from 2026 until 2028, and allow for establishment of the institutional capacities, allow for legislation to be in place, and allows for all the stakeholders to know their responsibilities and the requirements. Basically, from upon the finalization of the pilot phase, there will be a stable phase, and the stable phase by its design will resemble European Union ETS, which will closely align the price for the carbon in Ukraine with European Union ETS. And basically, one of the exemption condition for the electricity sector specifically is that by 2030, there is an ETS established in that country, specifically, for example, in this case, in Ukraine, with a price equivalence to European Union ETS. So basically, the steps are the following: to start with the pilot phase already in 2026, and by 2030, to have a mature national ETS where the prices for the domestic carbon is equivalent with European Union ETS prices, which is one of the conditions for exemptions for electricity. At which point of time Ukraine as a country gets such an exemptions, I believe that is a question that needs to be addressed to the Commission, basically indicating that the country is ready to submit or to indicate its readiness with all the criteria when the criteria are fulfilled, and then basically there will be an assessment done by the Commission, and in case the Commission finds that the criteria are fulfilled, the exemption for electricity sector needs to be granted, and also the specific indication needs to be made in the Annex 3 to the CBAM regulation. So yeah, there is no necessity to wait until 2030 with an introduction of ETS. It's rather 2026 when the ETS in its pilot phase needs to be introduced. At least that's our recommendations. Thank you. I hope that I answered your question, Yaroslav.
Thank you very much.
And Rouven, do you have the comment to this question, right? Okay.
Yeah, maybe just I can come here briefly and underline that something that Pavlo said, but add something additional, or an additional thought. So indeed, to fulfill the price equivalence by 2030, I mean, there's this confusion between 2026 and 2030. By 2026, pricing in CBAM will start. And to get the temporary exemption, Ukraine needs to credibly demonstrate that they intend to reach equivalent price by 2030. So pilot phase will probably start by 2026, according to Pavlo and the plans of the ministry. Even if that would be postponed, which I don't hope, let's say, even if it starts only by 2027, if Ukraine can credibly demonstrate that they have a roadmap, and that's why this roadmap requirement is there, that they have a roadmap to reach full equivalence of prices by 2030, then at the end of 2025, because actually this roadmap and this report has to be submitted the middle of July 2025, and then the Commission assesses this report and the compliance with the conditions. So at the end of 2025, the Commission will decide, will Ukraine pay CBAM from the 1st of January 2026? Yes or no? If the condition is the conditions are fulfilled, the exemption is granted. Ukraine does not pay in the electricity sector, does not pay CBAM from 2026. And then, of course, Ukraine has to work in actually implementing what they promised in the roadmap, getting the ETS on the road, reaching price equivalence by 2030. And here there's this difficulty of kind of promising something that will only be reached in the future, but credibly demonstrating that there is really commitment to reach this price equivalence. And Pavlo mentioned that after the pilot phase, in the stable phase, there's the intention to have a very similar or maybe even almost equivalent design of the ETS to EU ETS, between Ukrainian ETS and EU ETS. That will of course help, but it will be not it will be a necessary but not a sufficient condition to reach price equivalence. Prices will be formed on the market for allowances, and this market depends on demand and supply for these emissions allowances. And the supply of the allowances, of course, depends on the cap that is set within Ukraine's ETS. So the cap setting will be extremely important to determine future prices. Also, it will be extremely difficult to set this cap because, of course, it's very difficult to forecast what is the demand for emissions allowances in the future based on damages to the energy sector that we see every day, based on losses also to industrial assets that might be covered by the ETS. So we really recommend, and we have a separate policy proposal on that, that there would be a strong price stability mechanism in Ukraine's ETS through a carbon price floor or something similar, price collar, to really ensure that there will be some sort of price convergence over time towards EU ETS prices. Because otherwise it will be very difficult to credibly demonstrate that this price equivalence will be reached in the future. So some sort of convergence price path should be ensured with adequate price stability instruments in the ETS. So possibly there needs to be some additional design elements to what the EU ETS has, just because of Ukraine's peculiar situation with the war and damages to the energy sector.
Thank you, Rouven. We have a hand from Rodolfo for quite a long time. So can we, or Pavlo, do you want to like finish this discussion, or you could make your comment quickly or later?
Yeah, I will just briefly comment on the last point, which Rouven actually mentioned. Indeed, I mean the strategy itself, the draft version integrates this suggestion to establish this price flooring for the allowances in the national ETS. It's still subject for discussion and whether this instrument will be approved, but nevertheless, there is a part of our recommendations as well to integrate such a mechanism inside the domestic and national ETS, whether for the pilot phase or even for the longer duration. But thanks, Rouven, this valid suggestion has been taken into account and integrated into the strategy. That was a short comment from my side, and yeah, here I would stop.
Thank you, Pavlo. So Rodolfo, you are welcome to ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation, everyone. Just presenting quickly myself, I'm a PPA advisor for a PPA advisory company based in Munich, and we have a mandate to structure a PPA for a solar PV project in Ukraine. So my question is not really related to export of electricity, but in the first presentation, there was a slide showing the conditions for using the specific emissions. So my question is, for other carbon emission carbon intensive sectors, would this condition also apply, or it's only for electricity exports? Thank you.
Sorry, could you just repeat the last part of your question?
Yeah, no problem. My question is, if the conditions, like, let me get here, like for using the specific emissions intensity, if the same conditions also apply for other sectors.
Yeah, no. So this condition is specific to the electricity sector. There are other conditions for the other sectors. So, for example, steel exports or fertilizer exports, etc. There are very relatively detailed rules also how to prove specific embedded emissions for these sectors. And unfortunately, I can't give you too many details on those. I've not familiarized myself with the rules for the other sectors that much yet. but the rules differ between the different sectors. And also this situation with this default value is relatively specific to electricity, just because it's harder to track embedded emissions for electricity than other sectors. For other sectors, probably mostly the specific emissions intensity will be used, and the rules depend on the different sectors. But yeah, they're not exactly the same, but there are of course rules how to calculate embedded emissions for all the different goods that are specified in the regulation and then secondary legislation as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we have a question from the chat to Rouven again about there is a need to clarify the calculation of the gradual transition of CBAM from 2026 to 2034, the percent of EU ETS price level. So can you comment on that?
I'm not sure if I understand exactly what the question is, but the question is about how this is calculated or how it will be applied in practice. So there's
the question is about the calculation. So
okay, so the regulation itself, I'm not sure exactly what the article is now, but in the regulation itself, there's an article that specifies how the CBAM is phased in gradually from 2026 to 2034. I believe the language used is CBAM factor, if I recall correctly. And this factor, basically, we took directly the numbers for these factors and just visualized this in the graph. That's how we derived it. So this graph on the phase-in of the CBAM price is directly based on the regulation, and it's in terms of percent of EU ETS allowance prices. So maybe this is the question actually. So the CBAM regulation doesn't say exactly what the price will be. Actually, the Commission will calculate and publish based on every week on the past week's average price for EU ETS allowance prices, what the CBAM price will be. So the CBAM price will mirror weekly averages of EU ETS prices. So as the EU ETS price fluctuates, also CBAM price will fluctuate. And during the gradual phase-in, of course, there's this adjustment with the CBAM factor, so that, let's say, at some point we are at 10% of EU ETS. So if EU ETS prices last week on average were 8 euros, then CBAM price would be 8 euros. And then in another year, if it's 20 or 30%, then of course this price increases. So it depends both on the EU ETS price, which by itself is fluctuating, and on this CBAM factor, which is the factor at which rate the price is kind of phased in to reach full EU ETS prices.
great. Thank you, Rouven. Do we have any more questions from the audience to our speakers? Yeah, Mykola.
Yeah, thank you. If there are no other questions, I would like to ask one broad question, probably to anyone who is willing to comment. From a perspective of a renewable energy producer in Ukraine, what should be the priority? Is to focus on like potential CBAM exemptions, or to focus on the conditions of applications, the actual emission factors for electricity generated? Thanks.
I mean, I can't give you a definite answer, but maybe I can give you some thoughts. And if anyone else wants to come in, please do so. So I think as a renewable producer, probably you want to have a kind of two-way strategy. At the one side, for the exemption condition, to obtain the exemption, that's the task of the government. These conditions are mostly legislative. So, but of course, as a renewables producer and as an association of renewables producers, it makes sense to lobby the government and tell the government, look, this is really important to us, and we really hope that Ukraine's government can obtain this exemption, and highlight what needs to happen to obtain this exemption. So on the one hand, I think it's just telling the government that obtaining the exemption would be really beneficial for electricity exporters. And then on the other hand, of course, this depends more on what is your kind of the market you're targeting. But if you are targeting exports to the EU, then yeah, it would make sense to think about whether you want to sign a direct PPA and fulfill the other conditions to be able to qualify for this specific emission intensity, which would be then zero under for renewables exporters. But if you're just selling on the domestic market, I don't know, under green tariff or some other arrangement, direct merchant PPAs, then maybe this is not even that relevant if you're not exporting to the EU. So it depends on what markets you're targeting.
But then, just to make clear for myself, then the first option is also not relevant for the renewable energy producer. That like the advocating for the
Yes.
CBAM exemptions. Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, actually, maybe just an afterthought. It is still somewhat relevant if you're not looking to export still, because it affects the entire electricity market of Ukraine. A failure to obtain the exemption condition, to obtain the exemption, would mean that market coupling between Ukraine's electricity market and the EU might not move forward. And this would, of course, also affect the domestic market and affect domestic prices. With market coupling, there is an expectation that wholesale market prices would converge, not in all hours, but more or less converge to EU prices, which are on average higher, which is attractive for producers. And without market coupling, prices might be lower. So actually, even if you're not targeting exports, you might be very interested in lobbying for obtaining the exemption, because the exemption is necessary precondition for market coupling with the EU, which really affects wholesale prices and actually affects your revenues.
Thanks.
Pavlo, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, just a quick one. Regarding the paper load, I believe the exemption for the electricity sector would be definitely more preferable for the electricity producers, also for the renewable, since the exemption does not place an obligation on the producer to produce this reporting. In the alternative option, then yes, the whole number of the documents, including the PPA and the reporting, would needs to be in place. So from the administrative point of view, it's also from my point of view is quite valuable for advocating the exemption for the electricity sector. But that's yeah, one sort of that on that from the administrative burden for the producer. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pavlo.
Thank you, Pavlo. We have another question from Sergey Shimli.
Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, I want to share my reflections on the previous question from Mykola Shlapak. Firstly, let me introduce myself. I'm an advisor on the European integration and international cooperation in the Ministry of Energy. And we had a similar discussion with Rouven before about the challenges and opportunities for renewable power generators. And RAS producers have both. Let's delve deeper into opportunities. In implementing regulations, there is certain methodology for calculating direct emissions from the producing of electricity. And basically, there are two ways. The first one is that the amount of electricity is multiplied by the default value provided by the International Energy Agency, and in that sense, it will be a challenge for us producers as well as for nuclear power generators, whereas these default values are based on the amount of fossil fuels used for electricity production for a certain period of time and calculated by the International Energy Agency. In the case if the producer can provide information that look here, my electricity production does not involve so much emissions that the default value shall be used for my embedded emissions. In that case, there has to be a proof. And in connection with that, renewable power generators in Ukraine especially has to lobby for the overall roll-in of guarantees of origins, because that's the only viable option to show that the electricity is green and there's no CBAM charge on that. That's first one. And the second one, renewable power generators should be interested in concluding the direct power purchase agreements. For us in the regulations, there is clearly specified that there is provision not to pay on the based on the default value, but on the actual emissions if there is direct power purchase agreement. And the third and last but not least opportunity for renewable power producer is to conclude corporate power purchase agreements directly with exporters, Ukrainian exporters of iron, steel, fertilizers, and so on and so forth. So is coming back to the methodology of calculating embedded emissions for other sectors. Basically, there are two components: direct emissions during the production and indirect emissions during the electricity production. And when the producer in Ukraine can provide this guarantee of origin that his electricity used during the production process was from renewable power plants, then CBAM charge for the importer in the EU will be lower. That's it. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Sergey. Rouven?
Yeah, just a quick reaction and comment on the guarantees of origin. So on the industrial side, steel makers, etc., who are also partially covered for scope what is it, scope 2 or scope 3 emissions? Well, the emissions of the electricity that are purchased in the production, the guarantees of origin will be very, very useful to prove that certain electricity is used from renewables in the production. When we talk about electricity exports directly, unfortunately, our interpretation of the CBAM regulation is that guarantees of origins are not sufficient to prove that this is renewable electricity. The regulation is very clear that they require a direct power purchase agreement as one of the conditions between the EU importer and the producer of electricity. So buying electricity on the wholesale market and also obtaining guarantees of origin is not sufficient to prove that. And I believe one of the reasons why the Commission has chosen to require direct PPAs and not guarantees of origins only is because of the kind of the equilibrium effect or the wider market effect of only relying on GOOs. So if you export green electricity instead of using it domestically, of course, someone else in the country who is consuming electricity domestically instead needs to use potentially fossil electricity instead of the renewable electricity, which is then exported. So kind of the overall effect, even if you're exporting green electricity, might be higher emissions inside Ukraine. And I believe that the Commission wants to avoid this kind of carbon leakage. And that's why they put these high requirements and require a direct PPA, plus the other conditions, non-congestion of the network, nominated cross-border allocation capacity, etc. Capacity allocation, in order to really prevent this type of carbon leakage. So just a comment from my side that the burden is actually, or the hurdle, the obstacle is actually very high if you want to get the specific emission intensity as an exporter. It's not just getting a guarantee of origin.
Well, if I may reflect on this one, yes, there is really this tough, contradictory question. But yesterday I was on the meeting with the energy community experts, and they said the guarantees of origins are important in the context that when the direct power purchase agreement is concluded, the graph stating how many emissions were produced is supported by this guarantee of origin. But yes, there is still a large room for the establishment of direct power purchase agreements for renewable power generators because of the peculiar market structure in Ukraine of the support, and not even to mention that situation. But yeah, that's my point of view. But still, probably a lot of work to do and a lot of clarifications to make.
Okay, so we have time for the final comments. Olha?
Yes, I just want to mention that I fully support Rouven, that like we do not need to find out some kind of approach to cheat under the CBAM regulation, and we need to decarbonize all over the economy. And actually, we with Mr. Mykola Shlapak from the Ministry of Economy, from the Green Economy Transition Office, now working on the estimating this grid emissions factors under the different methodologies, under the different approaches, and to provide this data on a regular basis to the electricity producers and to all the carbon intensive businesses. And course, if somebody do not know about this, the cabinet of the ministries in the late of February supported the resolution on the introduction of guarantees of origin of electricity producers from RES. So if you're interested in this, the secondary legislation is undergoing too. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Olha. Rouven?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't know if it's time for final concluding sentences. Yes.
High time for the conclusions already. Yeah.
Excellent. So I just wanted to thank all the other speakers for joining me and joining us today. And I thought it was a really good discussion, also for the questions in the Q&A. It was some really relevant questions to clarify. As we see, there are still many questions that have to be clarified. And I wanted to invite all of you to another event that we as the Low Carbon Ukraine Project are organizing together with GIZ and the Ukrainian Climate Office on the 25th of April. This will be a hybrid event with the possibility to be there in person in the premises of the Ukrainian Climate Office in Kiev, or joining online. And we will have representatives from the energy community as well, including the head of the Green Deal unit, Adam Kvetch, and the lead for the CBAM readiness tracker at the energy community, Petr Poskaj. We will probably also have representatives from the European Commission. Hopefully we will have someone from DJ Taksud, although this is still to be confirmed, and probably also some high-level opening remarks from both the Ministry of Energy and Environment, but still to be confirmed. So you're all invited to join that event as well and continue the discussion we had today. And also we have some policy papers on our website, lowcarbonukraine.com, both on CBAM and the electricity exemption, as well as the policy proposal on ETS design for Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you, Rouven. And I join the words of Rouven on thanking everybody who have joined our discussion, to our experts and guests who had the presentations, and I think that it was a very productive event. Yes, there will be a recorded event, and we will share that on our YouTube channel. So you all would be able to watch that, because that was pretty intensive. So I welcome everybody to rewatch it, and maybe you will have new insights. You could definitely contact all the speakers afterwards in order to continue the discussion. Definitely, just summing up, definitely Ukraine has a lot of work to do in order to prepare ourselves for CBAM, especially that is complicated due to our current situation with the constant attacks on the energy system. However, we still have a lot of commitments in terms of reforming our electricity sector, and with all the market coupling and everything. So we will still have to do a lot of transposition of European legislation, and speaking about the developing the roadmaps and creating this predictability for energy companies in Ukraine and companies in different sectors that could be affected by CBAM is crucial, because that would signal Ukrainian business, and not only Ukrainian business, and given these valuable signals on the reconstruction efforts, on what technologies they should be using, and these economic incentives and creating these signals is very important, because we may face the situation of not really climate neutral reconstruction as well. I'm not saying that that should be all like 100 renewable. We are in the very serious situation in terms of especially in the electricity sector. However, we are talking about the reconstruction, which will take years to implement. So we already have to think about the signals that a Ukrainian government is given to the investors that would be coming to this field. So I really thank everybody for the insights. We will share the presentation and all the materials that our speakers would wish us to share with our participants today. Thank all the 49 people who have stayed with us for these 2 hours almost. So we are wrapping up. Thank you. Have a good day and stay safe.
Thank you, and see you in 2 weeks at the climate office.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.